This is a question that combines both traditional stroke absorption costing and activity-based costing. So in this question, we're provided some information on a number of products and we have to analyze it first using the traditional costing methods, sometimes referred to as absorption costing as well. In this approach, we have a single figure at the end of the day for overheads and we have a single basis for allocation. So in this question, you're not given a single figure for the overheads, and so you're given production of 450,000, ordering of 250,000, handling expenses of 55,000, and utilities of 85,000. But it's easy to get the overall number of overheads or amount of overheads. Just add all of those up to get 84,000 euro. Once we have this, we need to look at the basis for allocation. And so in this question, the obvious one to use is labor hours. And so in order to do this, we're going to lay it out as a table. We have 3 products, red, white, and green. We have a number of units for each one, being 335, 550, and 784 respectively. We also have the number of hours for each unit that's going to apply. And so by multiplying the number of hours by the number of units, we get the total number of hours. Add those up, and that gives us the total amount of our basis for allocation. Next, we're going to calculate the overhead per labor hour, so that will allow us to do the allocation. And so the overhead, 840,000 euro. The total hours was 3395, and so the overhead per hour is 247.42 euro. So what we now do is we multiply those by each of the total hours for each of the products, and that gives us the overhead that's allocated to each of those products. At this stage, we can then calculate the overhead per unit by just dividing each one of the overheads allocated by the number of units of those products that we're going to produce. So in this case, that will be 24240 for red, white will be 494.84, and green will be 618 euro and 55 cent. The question provides labor and materials for each unit. And so we can add those figures onto the overhead per unit so we can get a total unit cost for each of these products. So taking the overhead that we've just calculated for red at 247.42 and the others, we can then add on the labor of 60, 120 and 150 respectively, and the materials of 31, 39 and 50, which means we can work out the total cost per unit for each of these products. To work out the total production cost, then you multiply the number of units of each product by its total cost per unit, and we end up with the total production cost for product type. Now we're going to use activity-based costing, or ABC, to allocate the costs. This is based on cost drivers that drive individual cost pools, individual areas of costs, and each of those cost drivers is used to allocate those costs where the costs have been gathered to those pools. So we are going to use production runs, materials, and number of requisitions. We have the number of occurrences of each of these cost drivers. So when we add them all up together, we get the total number of cost drivers, and that will be used to allocate the amount of costs gathered into each cost pool. With each of the costs allocated to the cost pools in the question already, we can start to work out the cost per cost driver. So taking each of those individual amounts, we're going to divide it by the total number of cost drivers for each of those cost driver types. You can note here that we're actually using production runs as the basis for allocating utilities as well. And so we just divide the number into the cost pool amount, and that gives us the cost per cost driver. By taking the individual number of cost drivers for each product type and multiplying that figure by the cost per cost driver, we can work out a total figure of the overhead under each of the overhead types. And so that's what we've done here for production runs, materials handling, ordering materials, and the utilities. And that gives us a total overhead calculation for each of those products. So once we have that total overhead figure, we can divide it by the number of units in each case, giving an overhead per unit figure for each of the product types. Add on the materials per unit and labor per unit to get a total cost per unit for each of the product types. Then multiply that resultant figure by the total number of units that are produced in each case, and you'll get the total production overheads for each product. Once you've calculated the total production overhead for each product, you can compare those figures to the ones that were obtained when you used absorption costing, which is the second table added to this slide. You will note the total overhead for each product type that's shown in the top table, which is the ABC table, tends to be a lower cost when we produce higher numbers of units and a higher cost when we produce lower number of units. This is a tendency of absorption costing, and with ABC being considered more accurate overall, people will tend to use that figure as the correct one.